scale, so the molecular scale, there's just sort of like neural circuits and all that. And
yes, indeed.
There's something that comes to mind, which is this concept of fixed action patterns. Ropolinas and Bartholomew have been championed this, which is that you can't control every single detail of a behavior. Let's say like grabbing a cup of water, because there's too many degrees of freedom and you can't control that consciously. So throughout evolution, we've developed these things that are helpful to unconsciously control all those little details, but just consciously activate the actual process of moving. So in that framework, you could think of Tourette syndrome as just throwing in unconsciously a fixed action pattern to say a word, or in Parkinson's, not having control over the tremor, or in depression, let's say you can't stop ruminating, obsessive compulsive the same. And maybe even the issue of confabulation, there's the possibility that the brain is just automatically likes to generate hypotheses about the possible causal structure of the world. But it's missing some information because it's only the left hemisphere making the decision. So it'll just like make a fixed action pattern to make a model. So
yeah, well,
a real question there, but
yeah. There's a lot of things in what you say, and a lot of really interesting things. And the first thing that you said is that if we're going to think about a control parameter space, it is an open question whether you want to think about it at the molecular level as part of mind does, or whether you want to think about it at the microcircuit or the macrocircuit and so forth. And I think that we just wait and see how that works out. And so it may be that, and when Bill Bechtel comes to talk about mechanism and how to think about mechanisms and the relation between levels of organization in the brain and levels at which a mechanism resides, I think we'll just have to see how the data really come out on that. Yeah. Yeah.
I was just wondering, when you talked initially about sort of the folk psychology, idea of free will, and you said that was not the approach that the kind of cognitive scientists take, that we take a more materialistic approach to some extent.
To some extent,
the brain is, the person is the brain. And so I'm wondering to what extent that you think that view is compatible with this notion that if someone can not be in total control of their internal state, and we should excuse them from responsibility in certain cases in which they were, in which you're essentially saying, okay, well, if they were not fully conscious or they were not fully willing their own action, then we should divorce this internal person who's responsible for the action from the, you see what I'm saying?
You mean my left hemisphere made me do it, sort of thing?
I guess that would be one way of putting it. Like, to what extent is that compatible with this saying that the brain is the person, but then we can still distinguish them in cases of moral responsibility?
Yeah, well, I think this is why this is a deep question, a deep issue. But ultimately, you want to think about punishment, not in terms of, is it fair? I mean, I don't want to sound like a moral cretin, but I mean, the fundamental thing about punishment is, does it serve the social purpose it's meant to, right? Does it deter? Does it keep people from taking the law into their own hands? Does it involve public safety? Now, that is quite a different way, I think, of thinking about why we punish, at least in some ways. But ultimately, I mean, lots of people agree that's why we punish, but then they want to say, and it's got to be fair. And I think, well, I think what ideas about fairness really reflect is whether the punishment will do what it's supposed to do. Now, there's no point in punishing someone who's a sleepwalker. Because they didn't, it's not part of their character, they're not going to do it again. And as long as you, somebody else should talk about this while I get. I think that our concepts of fairness, and I think that's what you really see in Aristotle, when he says the default is that you hold people responsible unless they were involuntarily intoxicated or unless they were sleepwalking. And then, of course, we come to the issue of unless they were insane, by which he said he meant they didn't know who they were. And then, of course, we've tried to revise that. But ultimately, I think those ways of carving it up and allowing certain things as excuses have to do with our convictions about what we can predict about the person's behavior. So if, for example, I'm on a train with someone, he has an epileptic seizure and he hits me across the face, are we going to punish him? No, because in that instance we know how to stop that behavior. And it isn't an expression of his character. On the other hand, you know, if it's someone like Jeff Skilling, right, who's a conner and a manipulator and so forth, then it looks like you can predict what he'll do if you don't put him in jail. You can do the same thing. And also you want to deter people who might think about doing a Jeff Skilling kind of thing. Whereas if you punish an epileptic in the condition mentioned, is that going to deter anybody from hitting me? Probably not. So it sounds kind of crass to say it, that ultimately that's the way, you know, excuses and so forth are made, but I think in actual fact that's the way they should be made. And so this really raises tremendously important social questions about the drug laws and whether the drug laws could be improved upon. Does that? But I mean, the issues you're raising are huge. And in fact, there's going to be a meeting. This is quite an interesting thing. There's going to be a meeting at UC Riverside of judges in California and a group of neuroscientists. So, because they want to learn about the brain and they want to know about, you know, what is frontality exactly and what is the serotonin system exactly and so forth. And I will be going also, but I'm sort of hoping to learn more. I mean, I want to know how they see some of these things with the emerging science.
Yeah, so just one last comment on that. It's interesting because it's almost in the case of someone who, say, is you know, legally insane. It seems almost like we're drawing a distinction between the actions of, like, punishment as being for the individual as the decider and the individual as a system in terms of public safety.
Yeah.
I think it's just interesting. So.
Yeah. But I mean, there is no doubt that these issues are very difficult. So when Andrea Yates drowned her 5 children in the bathtub, there was no question but that she was psychotic. And nobody in Texas disputed that. But of course, Texas at this time has only one criterion for insanity, and that's the cognitive criterion. Do you know the difference between right and wrong? Now, hitherto, many states also had the volitional criterion that said, yes, you know the difference between right and wrong, but are you capable of acting on that? Now, many states changed the law after Hinckley shot Reagan, because Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity under the volitional component. The argument was that he did know that it was wrong to try to assassinate the president, but he was so overwhelmingly obsessed with Jodie Foster and so overwhelmingly convinced that only the assassination of Reagan would endear her to him, that what can you say? And of course they presented the whole case as it had developed over years, that he was volitionally incapable of doing anything else. And the jury bought it. And so after that, many states said, so no volitional component. So in Texas, when Andrea Yates drowned the 5 children, they might have found her not guilty but under the volitional component had it existed. But her actions were very deliberate. She knew what she